tighten your lines as we get ready to sail the seven seas on the Political Pirate Podcast. Join Captain Ted Yoho and the salty dog John Martin as they search far and wide for the greatest treasure of all, the truth. From local Florida news to nationwide stories and the globe beyond, we've got it all mapped out. Now here's your hosts, the salty dog John Martin and Captain Ted Yoho.
Good angry. Good morning there, John. How you doing? And I appreciate it. You looking good, tan, relaxed. Look like you had a successful fishing journey again. You are battle tested. He's going to keep you guessing. McIntyre, yeah. Yeah. Isn't that the truth? You know, I got to go with his gut feeling. I mean, he's usually right on stuff like this. And the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, which she was in charge of, reporting those numbers, that's something I've questioned over the years. I mean, it goes back to the Obama years and George Bush. You know, they come out with something, and I saw this more under Biden. They'll come out with this real strong jobs report, and you're looking around like, I don't see the economy being that strong, even during COVID. And they report these numbers, and then a month or two later, they would readjust them and they'd drop way down. And it was funny because you saw them do this more around the election periods. And I've always questioned how these numbers are analyzed, and then they put them out, then they refine them, and they're worse than what they said. And so I think what this really points to is a lack of trust in government. And I know it's a difficult job. You know, you've got a country of over 330 million people. You've got labor statistics that come in, you know, probably not all at once. And so it's confusing to do that. But to adjust it like they have, you know, it's high and then it's dropped down. And then with somebody like Trump, and keep in mind, with somebody like Trump, you've got the deep state. When they polled the bureaucrats in D.C., I think they said 85 to 90% would not do what Trump wanted. They would go against him. And so this lady, you know, she's got great resumes, and a lot of people talk good about her. But again, there's that skepticism I think it's a healthy skepticism, that we need to look at these things and go with Trump's gut feeling, and I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, well, I think in the last couple of presidential elections, Trump got less than 3% of the vote in D.C., something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
It kind of tells you. But, you know, I think the numbers themselves, I mean, think about this, because like the laws are quite often made by lawyers to make it complicated. Economics is a complicated science. I'm not saying it's not, but the numbers, you know, I think sometimes they make it complicated for a reason, because the way I look at it, like I think my daddy used to say it, you know, the difference between a recession and a depression is a recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose your job.
Ain't that the truth? Old Sid was smart.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But Donald Trump, back to this article. Donald Trump on Friday fired Erica, we said her name, McAntifer, the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, on the heels of a market, this is their words, market shocking weak scorecard of U.S. job market, accusing her, this is their line, without evidence of manipulating the figures and adding to an already growing concern. I love that part where they say without evidence, because you kind of alluded to it right there, and I want to drill down in a minute. I'm just going to tell you my opinion on it. I think Donald Trump
what you're here for.
Ted, I think Donald Trump is totally justified. Forget this particular case one way or another. He is justified to fire every single person that Joe Biden, or for that matter, Barack Obama, appointed, because there's a mountain of evidence that they're trying to get Donald Trump. Stop him from doing. There's just an overwhelming, and we'll talk a little bit about it, but I mean, that's kind of the way I see it. There's every evidence that the deep state is anti-Donald Trump. I mean, that's just
there's no doubt. I mean, the polling shows that when they poll the workforce up in D.C., as you brought out, I think less than 3% of the people claim to have voted for Donald Trump. And when you have a deep state that's working against you, that's one thing to derail a presidency. But look at the effect they have on the American citizens. It causes inactivity, just confusion. And whenever there's a state of confusion and people don't know what to do, you get inactivity. And, it's time to get over that. And Trump got so burned with the deep state that worked against him that first election that I agree with you. I would get rid of everybody and put in people that I know that I can trust. And then I'd be cautious with them, too. And it's not that I want to put a rosy picture on everything. I just want the facts, and the American people want what's true. And if you can't give me that, don't tell me the BS that you think and then come back, oh, yeah, we were a little off on that by about 800,000 jobs or whatever the number is. And, I think, again, Trump's got a good instinct, especially on the business side. So let's go with what he's saying.
Well, Ted, one of the things that always jumps to mind to me was during that first impeachment trial of President Trump, when they were talking about, they had those foreign policy experts up there. They had people who worked for the State Department testifying against Trump. And to a person, they basically said that this is not the way we do foreign policy in the United States, kind of thing. This is not the way we've always done it. Like somehow they were the authority. And that really jumped out at me, because this goes back to an overall lack of understanding of how the government works. There's three branches, of course: the judicial, the congressional, the legislative, and the executive. Foreign policy falls 100% under the executive side of it. Now, I'm not saying there's not bills passed and stuff like that in Supreme Court rulings, but the administration of foreign policy is 100% under the executive branch. So everybody in the in the State Department, whether they've been there 2 days or 20 years, works at the behest of Donald Trump or whoever the president is, and he runs foreign policy. The State Department doesn't, in fact, run foreign policy outside of the presidency. They run it under the presidency. So it was
they implement it.
I hate to be long-winded, but I just want to make this. That whole thing with them testifying just showed you that the deep state thinks that they're more important than any legislative body or the executive branch or the Supreme Court, for that matter. They're the true power in D.C.
They really are. That's the way they think. And you're so right on the foreign policy. The president sets that. The State Department implements that. And I've said over and over again, I think our foreign policy branch of government is the most important. That's why I was so happy to be on the Foreign Affairs Committee, because if you don't have good foreign policy, you don't have good trade policy, you don't have national security, you have a weak jobs market. But if you have good trade policies, all that falls into place. And this goes back to, you look at the Revolutionary War. What was that over? It was a tyrannical government from Britain. But you also look at the trade policies they did with the taxing of the tea and all that. That, was kind of the nidus that sparked that first conflict. Then you look at the Civil War, part of that was over slavery, but a bigger part was over the trade of the northern states versus the southern states. And that's led to a lot of the wars we've had since then. And, we got into the ideological wars with the Korean War and Vietnam. Those were to stop the spread of communism. But trade is so important, and it has to be done right. And the policies, I would love to see that Congress codify some of these trade policies in legislative language so that it doesn't change from administration to the next. And I think I shared with you with Peter Navarro wanted me to put a bill in that would have given Trump executive privilege on all trade policies without having to go through Congress on some of these. And I said, absolutely not. And he got mad at me. And I says, I would agree with this president, but my concerns is if he leaves and a Democrat comes in, they're going to, utilize what we've authorized them to do. And I came up here to rebalance those three branches of government, and this would not do that. He stormed out of my office.
You mentioned about trade and all of that, and right now, kind of a side story to this, Congress is out of session, and there's like 150 or maybe it's 180 appointments, something to that effect, that Donald Trump still hadn't gotten through. And basically the Democrats are trying to gum up the works on that. And they literally, Ted, I don't know if you caught this, I just caught it this morning, that the Democrats said that they would let many of Donald Trump's appointees go through if he gave them $2 billion, mostly to go to foreign governments, mostly for overseas aid. So they're putting the foreign trade, not trade, but foreign aid over the American people. It's as clear as a bell on that. So they're just trying to obstruct Donald Trump at every single turn.
I mean, that's a perfect case of extortion. And, the American people weighed in on U.S. aid and foreign aid. And they said they didn't want that, and so they've gotten rid of it. And I'm a proponent of good foreign aid that's effective, that moves us closer to more secure, safer, and, making strong trade deals. But I'm 100% against just giving out grants to these countries that just take advantage of the American taxpayer. So for Chuck Schumer to shut this down, it really is an act of extortion for the reason he wants to shut it down.
So you're not really for aid for queer theory, transvestites thing in Bangladesh? I mean, that was one of the things that came out of USAID. It's unbelievable, man. But if you're wondering out there, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to show you a video here in just a second. If you're wondering if I'm way off base with this as far as what the Democrats will do to hamstring Donald Trump, I want to play an oldie, sort to a certain extent, but a goldie, and it comes from one of your favorite people, of course, Ted. We can't hardly do a show without Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but I want you to listen to this video.
You're killing me, John. You're killing me.
I want you, I got to torture you a little bit, Ted, but I want you to listen to this video and catch what she says at the very end of this, because she's talking about the reasons to investigate and impeach Donald Trump. And this last little snippet really says a lot. And I'm going to let you hear it and we'll talk about it. Check it out.
Impeachment since before you were elected to Congress, and you made the case that the president could be impeached for profiting off the presidency for his conduct in the Russia investigation. What message, Congresswoman, will it send if Democrats don't incorporate, for example, those issues into the upcoming articles of impeachment?
Well, I think many of those considerations will be taken up by the Judiciary Committee when all of this evidence is brought forth. So we'll see. I personally do believe that the president has engaged in flagrant violations of the Emoluments Clause. I'm concerned that we would allow this corruption to continue. But at the end of the day, we have to be able to come together as a caucus. And if it is this Ukrainian allegation that is what brings the caucus together, then I think we have to run with however we unify the House. And so while I believe personally that we should be pursuing and investigating quite flagrant abuses of the Emoluments Clause, even reporting as recently as these suspicious stops at Trump properties, even in congressional delegations, or rather in foreign trips. I think that all of this is game for investigation, but we also need to move quite quickly because we're talking about the potential compromise of the 2020 elections. And so this is not just about something that has occurred. This is about preventing a potentially disastrous outcome from occurring next year.
And Ted, there's you have it. She gives a list of reasons to impeach Donald Trump. But at the very end there, she says we need to impeach him for basically future crime, what might happen to stop the 2020 election from happening of Donald Trump. I mean, so, and you mentioned it off the air, and please expand on that about Biden's, pardons for the future of any crimes. I mean, this is kind of what the Democrats are doing.
Let me do her first.
Yeah,
Let me do her first, because she goes. Anyways, she's wrong. I mean, I don't know what to say. In this whole video, I watched this clip. She was talking about that State Department person that worked for this administration, for the Trump administration, on that first impeachment, and that he doesn't listen to his own people. He went against his own people on the Ukrainian phone call. Now, I was there at the hearing in the Intelligence Committee as a bystander watcher. And Michael Vindman was the guy that ratted out Trump and said what he did was wrong, it was unconstitutional. But when you got down and analyzed why he was upset, it was because he wrote the talking points for the speech with the call with the person he was talking to. And Trump ad-libbed. And so this guy his feelings were hurt. So he came out, plus he was a Democrat, and I think he might even be in Congress now. There's a Vindman. I don't know if it's him, but if it is, I mean, he's a Democrat working against this administration. And what you brought up about Ocasio-Cortez at the very end, we need to impeach him for what he might do. Well, Joe Biden must have listened to that, because he gave preemptive pardons to pretty much everybody that he knows or knows him, so that anything they might commit in the future will be exempt from being prosecuted. I mean, you talk about a breakdown of the rule of law, and she talks about the rule of law. Give me a break. This is a lady that's asked for defunding the police. You can't arrest people. It's okay to shoplift. Yeah, I mean, the list goes on and on. And, how the people of Queens in New York elect this person, it's a bad reflection on the IQ average of that district.
Yeah, well, like we talked about a little bit on Friday, we played that video of Nancy Pelosi about AOC's district, that a glass of water could get elected there. So if true, Ted, I just want to say,
must be toilet water.
Yeah, everybody in that district, in AOC's district, if what Nancy Pelosi says is true, please elect a glass of water. And not a cup.
Yeah, really.
I'd rather have a glass of water, half full or whatever, than Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah,
but go ahead.
Her bucket's half empty. Her bucket, her elevator doesn't go all the way up to the top.
I hear you, man. But on the second part of this article, it talks about this lady who resigned from the Fed board, and her name is Adriana Kugler. I know nothing about her, but basically they're making a case here that now that she's resigned, it will give Donald Trump a chance to appoint someone to the Federal Reserve that most likely he would appoint someone, this is speculating, that might be the Fed chair when that comes around. What are your thoughts on that in general?
I think it's a great opportunity to change the board, kind of like he did with the Supreme Court. Get people in there that aren't going to play politics with the Fed. It's like this. It's like the black box theory. They go into this room and they do all this stuff, manipulating and all these secret things, and you don't have a clue of what they're really analyzing. They may be playing cards or watching sports or something, and they come out, and really the interest rates need to go down. John, we've got a house on the market right now, and my son's got a house on the market right now, and we're going into 160 days on the market. The biggest thing we hear from our realtors and buyers are the interest rates are too high. And so it's holding that up. And we even put incentives in there for people to buy, and they're just saying, no, we want a lower interest rate. And Jerome Powell, with the way the economy is going, he could afford to bring that down. And keep in mind, those high interest rates are affecting our national debt. We're spending over $3.2 billion a day on interest payments on that debt. And that's something that's only going to get higher as our debt increases at these interest rates. And that's, if you remember, I've talked about that phone call we had with Jerome Powell, or the meeting we had with him, where he said he's not worried about the interest payments. They're historically low at that time. They're under 2%. And he goes, we great economy. We don't have to worry about our interest and paying off our debt. Well, he was 100% wrong on that. Guy needs to go.
Well, you mentioned about, and this expert in here talks about politicizing stuff. Well, Jerome Powell lowered interest rates just prior to the election in 2024, like basically a month out, obviously to try to help Joe Biden. So, politicizing it is...
Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
But the bottom line for me, Ted, gets back to what I said earlier, that I really believe that that Donald Trump should just clean house. I think it's time to clean house. And, they're talking about all this politicization. But I think about, Admiral Farragut, the famous saying, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead if we can do that. It may sound pretty radical, and I certainly may sound that, but I posted this, and I don't know if we can pull it up or not yet. I may be ahead of my producer here. But I put a meme up about we're not far to the right, but we're right so far. And that, to me, is where the progressives have pushed me, Ted. I used to be, I don't want to say a moderate. I've always been somewhat conservative, but I could see both sides of an issue. But the Democrats have pushed me to the point where I just say, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. Donald Trump needs to take whatever time he has, whether it's 2 years because of the midterms or 4 years for his final term here, and just clean house. And let's see where we are after that.
Really does. And you brought up a great point there. You've got the midterms coming up in less than a year and a half. And if he loses the majority, it'll be impeachment, investigation. And you'll have people like AOC, Cory Booker, and Joaquin Jeffries, and all the other radical leftists. And Schumer will go farther left, and they'll all be working against Trump. They're working against Trump, but they're working against the American people and the country. They're weakening this country. And so that's why, again, our job is to educate, motivate, and activate people so that we don't lose the midterm. We don't lose the majority. In fact, we want to build those numbers, because if they get back in power, just go back to what the last administration did and look at what they did at the end. The preemptive pardons. You talk about a breakdown of the rule of law. Give me a break. You want these people back in, and the open borders. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And people have a short-term memory, including me. But we have to remember that. We have to keep that out there, because that's what's at stake here. And the bottom line of what is at stake is the freedom and liberties we have that come from Western ideologies and liberal democracies.
Yeah, it's it really is. We've got some tough choices to make. Well, we don't have a choice on this. We're going to take a quick commercial break here. Please like what we're doing, share it far and wide. Please support the show and our sponsors. And if you'd like to become a sponsor, look at the little tab that says Contact Freddie and call
Freddie.
that number. And Ted, lead us into break, man.
Well, before you go, since you that got a Gator hand right behind you, I've got to drink my Gatorade down here in the Florida Keys.
Absolutely.
Look forward to the break, and I hope your weather up there is good. It's awesome down here, and let's go to break.
We'll be right back.
Although the owner of Lewis Oil Company maintains she is 29, Lewis Oil turns 60 years old in June. Chevron would like to recognize the North Florida second-generation family-owned business, celebrating its growth and staying power. Lewis Oil Company maintains significant on-hand supplies, strategically located fuel depots, a delivery fleet, on-site service, fuel card locks, and convenience stores. Lewis Oil Company understands its responsibility in the local economy by providing service and delivery on demand and in crisis. As a first responder for 18 Florida counties and the Southeast from Texas to Virginia, we are proud of this rare accomplishment. Lewis Oil delivers.
This is Ward Scott. And I want to thank all our sponsors who keep the show going and pay the bills. The Ward Scott Files premium sponsors are Crime Prevention Security Systems, large enough to serve you, small enough to care.
Meldon Law, the only official injury partner of the Florida Gators.
The Ward Scott Files Gold sponsors are Lewis Oil Company,
Shoot GTR,
On the Spot Dry Cleaners, R&R Construction, and Style Cuts. If you are interested in promoting your business on the show, you can visit our website, www.wardscottfiles.com, and click on the Advertise Here banner on the right side of the page, or call my friend Freddie at 352-284-3733. Again, thank you to all the great businesses that support the Ward Scott Files. And remember, if you like the show, thank our sponsors and support the businesses that support us.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. May God have mercy on your soul.
Or that very much surprises me that you've never been tased.
You can't handle the truth!
All bees poop.
A warthog. He's going to come up the steps. Here he comes. Oh my goodness, and he's huge. Hello, boy. I wonder if we can pet him. Hi, boy.
Can we touch him? No, don't.
Help me! Help! Help!
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the 3 Ps, the Political Pirate Podcast, with yours truly, the host, the old salty dog, John Martin, and live from somewhere in the Keys, Mr. Ted Yoho, the captain of our ship.
Location not reported.
There you go. Well,
that's right.
I want to give a little precursor to this video we're about to play. I warn people out there, it's a bit shocking, but it's real, and it's sad, scary, all these things. We're going to play a small snippet of it. And what this was released by Hamas from Gaza. This is for now at least, a living Israeli hostage. And, well, I think the video speaks for itself. Check it out.
ב-28 שעה 12, אין לי מושג אם יהיה אוכל, אין לי שמץ של מושג. אני רוצה להגיד לראש הממשלה, לנתניהו, שאני פשוט מרגיש שאני מופקר פה לחלוטין. מה שאני עושה עכשיו, אני חופר את הקבר, הקבר שמיועד מבחינתי לי, כי כל יום שעובר הגוף שלי הולך, נחלש.
עצום שחסום ממטאור בלתי ניתן להזזה.
Watching helplessly as my younger brother, Eviatar David, and his fellow hostage, Guy Gilboa Dalal, slip away. They are on the absolute brink of death.
הילד שלי גוסס. ראיתי את זה בעיניים שלי. וגם ראש הממשלה ראה את זה.
But it also makes me more fight.
והוא יודע על מצב.
Number one, look at who's putting out the video. It's Hamas. All right. So it's a propaganda film. We've seen this with ISIS. We've seen it with the Vietnamese. We've seen it anytime there's war. War is ugly. It's painful. But remember why Israel is at war with Hamas. Remember October 7th, I think it was, wasn't it? When the Hamas flew into Israel by kites, by going across the border, killing, raping, videoing people, cutting children's heads off, burning them, all those nasty things. That was the nidus, the cause of what Israel did. And Israel has tried everything to get these hostages back. President Trump's weighed in on this. Hamas needs to go. The new people that want to take over Palestine, they want nothing to do with Hamas. And they, until Hamas is gone, you're going to have these kind of atrocities. And I feel bad for that person. I've never been in that situation, nor do I desire to, or I don't think anybody does. It's a shame that people are this cruel in the world today. When I was in Congress, the question was, do you believe in a two-state solution? A state of Palestine and a state of Israel. That has been offered to the Palestinian Authority under Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas is the ruler there now. Palestine will not accept the two-state solution because they don't want anything to do with Israel. Remember, from the river to the sea, they want all that to be Palestine. So they do not recognize Israel. So a two-state solution will not work until Palestine recognizes Israel's right to exist. And I asked Abbas when I was in there, when we went to Jerusalem, does Israel have a right to exist? He wouldn't answer the question. And that was in 2013. So the same sentiment is there now. And until they can come to terms on a two-state solution, there will be no peace. And we saw the French President Macron, and then we saw the new Prime Minister of Canada, Carney, come out and say, they're going to recognize Palestine as a state. Is that the right thing to do? If it would bring peace there, yeah, it would be. But they have to recognize Israel as a state too. They being Hamas, Palestine.
You've heard me say this before, but about the two-state solution, there was a two-state solution, not officially, but basically Gaza was somewhat independent on its own for the last decade or more. And Israel, I'm not saying Israel didn't have assets in there and watch them. You can't really blame them for that. But had the Palestinians turned that area into what Donald Trump was talking about, like, a Mediterranean paradise, do you really believe that the world wouldn't have been 100% on their side? Israel gave them free electricity and free water and basically autonomy. And what did Hamas do? Name me one thing that Hamas built other than tunnels and fortifications. They didn't build any new schools, hospitals. They didn't create any new business except illegal arms trade. What business did they create over there?
Hatred and terrorism is their business. And if you go back to one of their lead guys, Yasser Arafat, he was a student of Mao Zedong. He believed in communism. The Little Red Book was, their Bible. And that was the faction leading this against Israel. And, until they get rid of that toxic element, Hamas, and that ideology, which it's hard to get rid of an ideology. But you can beat it by competition. And like you said, if the Palestinian people were to take hold of the opportunity and build whatever kind of country they want, but focuses on trade, maybe tourism and peace, they would run the Hamas out of there and those kind of people.
Well, and you mentioned about the trade and all. The bottom line, if you look at the history of warfare in general, especially the more modern history going back to World War I and II and what we're doing now or dealing with now, desperate times create desperate situations. When people are fat and happy and making money, they don't want to fight. Who the heck wants to go fight when you could go to the beach and have a good time or go fishing or go to the Keys? Americans don't really want to fight. That don't mean we're not willing to. We don't want to. But think about they talk about Nazis and Hitler. The best way to prevent the Nazis is to have a prosperous economy. The reason why Hitler was able to come to power is because people were desperate. Desperate. Do you really? That's why Hamas does what they do. They don't build anything, because if they created a paradise on the Caribbean like Donald Trump envisioned, do you really think they'd be wanting to fight? The average person would be just wanting to go to the beach.
Well, you know what? You brought up a good point. Desperate times require desperate actions. So you look at the Democrats now, they're desperate. They are desperate. They're struggling. And so who are they electing? They're electing Zoran Madanis. They're electing not Cory Booker, Presley, the Ocasio-Cortez. They're electing the more radical left progressives because they're desperate. And then, as you said, the desperate times in Germany, because it really came from complacency of the German people. They didn't see, any way to solve the solution of inflation and all that. And they were just like, well, the government will take care of that. That led to Hitler. And that's what the Democrats are doing. They're in desperate times. They'll accept anybody. And we went back to that Ken Martin, the guy that's in charge of the Democrat National Committee. He says, we want a big dent. We're going to have the moderates, the straightforward Democrats, the progressive Democrats, and even the leftist Democrats. So they're willing to take anybody to win an election. But what they don't realize is they're going to be consumed by the more radical movements and portions of that party. And that's why elections matter. And that's why we're on here, John, to educate, motivate, and activate.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we need people to like what we're doing, share what we're doing far and wide, sponsor our program, support our sponsors, all of that kind of stuff, because we need people to be more engaged, not less engaged. Because, I said this before, but if I say it, it bears repeating, that these communist countries, and you could throw Hamas in there, but you look at China, you look at Russia, and you think about the Ukraine war. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why these happen, but the primary reason that communist countries like Russia and like China need conflict is because without conflict, they cannot hold on to power. Because I go back, when people, the president Obama said we want hope and change. Well, I say Donald Trump wants change you can spend, that kind of thing. If I keep saying it, but if you're
change you can hope for.
Yeah, if you're happy with your situation, if your family's doing well, if you're eating well, if you're entertaining, going on vacations and stuff like that, the last thing in the world you want to do is fight and war. So these, the Ukraine war, if you think about that, one of the reasons why it's important for Russia beyond some economic issues is to keep people desperate, because things are getting bad in Russia. And if they get so bad, it's one thing to stand in a food line or whatever. But if you're standing in a food line and you're at peace, you're going, why is this happening? But you can say, well, we're standing in a food line because those Ukrainians have attacked us or whatever. Those types of things make a difference. So that's one of the things you mentioned, Mondami, and he's got to make New York and all really bad, because then desperate people will do desperate things like vote for somebody like him.
Well, and then they'll come in and say, see, we fixed it for you. We made life better for you. And so they become more indebted to that. And that's I guess, a paradox of the Democrat Party. They create a situation like the open borders. It's a terrible situation, led to crime, rapes, drugs. Not that we didn't have that before, but it increased and accelerated what we're seeing. So they create a situation and they make it so bad. They lost the election, but then if they were in power, they would bring that somewhat under control and say, see how benevolent we are? And this is what Madani is doing up there. And this is the paradox. They create the situation, tell you how bad it is that they created, and then they come back and they start fixing it. And it's we can't fall for that kind of just nonsense, because it's political suicide. We need to keep people strong. Leadership is tough. You've got to make tough decisions, and Trump is doing those things. They're not always popular, but in the end, we're all going to benefit from that. And it's not just him, but it's the Republican base. It's that MAGA movement. And again, keep in mind, Donald Trump is a symptom of that movement and the sentiment of the American people. You look back at the Tea Party when that started in 2010. It was a sentiment of the American people that something was wrong with government, the lack of trust in government. They knew it was off. And Donald Trump, they want to say he's the reason for all these problems. No, he is a symptom of the underlying problems. He is correcting them, and we've given him our vote to correct those things.
Yeah, well, you remember Donald Trump on Oprah Winfrey quite a few years ago said that, if he ran for president, it would be because he felt like the American dream, basically, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, that our country was in peril and that he would do it. So that's,
John,
that's why he did it, really.
That's why I ran. It was the American dream was under attack. It was being threatened by government overregulations, rules, the open border, the printing of money. And, unfortunately, the big, beautiful bill is going to increase debt $5 trillion. And that's going to lead to printing more money. And the end result of that is just diluting the value of our dollar. That's why one of the reasons things are so expensive. And then you have inflation on top of that. And it's a mess. And so we've got to work through these things, and we can do more than one thing at a time. We can work on inflation, we can work on the border, we can work on national security and dealing with China, which is really, besides our debt, and it's debt, China, and the open borders, and he got borders under control for this administration.
Well, I want a little side note on this story. We showed that video that Hamas released of the Israeli hostage literally starving to death. But I'm going to put up a picture here in just a moment that comes from the New York Times, because I want to make a point. We talk about educating, motivating, and activating people. And this picture is real, but it's not in a way. The message, the New York Times had to do somewhat of a retraction on this. I want to show you this picture. It's pretty graphic as well, and then I'll come back and make a point about it. Check it out if you can. Okay, so you see that is a mother in Gaza, I'm assuming a Palestinian, holding, I think he's about an 8-year-old boy, and he's totally emaciated. You can literally see his backbone. It's a real picture. But the New York Times essentially said this child is starving to death from the famine that's been created by Israel and the America, USA, and all of that. Now, when I first saw that picture, I knew immediately, Ted, and I haven't heard anybody else say this, I knew immediately the story was bogus. I did not necessarily mean that the picture was, because, there's AI, there's all kind of stuff, but I knew because that woman looked like she loved that child. And and in that picture, she is perfectly healthy. There is no mother, no matter where in the world, if they love a child, that is going to be healthy looking and their child starving to death. That is never going to happen. It turns out that child had a muscular disease that he can't really put weight on and all that. But here's the thing I want to make a point on. What really disturbed me about that is not the New York Times with their BS, not anything that might be AI generated, but that people couldn't take one look at that picture and see exactly what I just said. Because that tells me that people lack the ability to critically think, because my mind went right there. There's no way that picture could represent what they're saying. It's not possible. But I haven't really heard anyone else make that point, Ted. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good point. I didn't make that connection as like you did until I kind of researched it. You look at people that are true famine, where the babies look like that, but the mothers look like that too. In nature, an animal will starve itself to protect that baby. They'll do anything they can to protect that baby. I mean, we see it in cattle, we see it in horses. They're going to do whatever they can to make sure that offspring is well nourished. And that was a good point you brought up. Very, very sleuth-like there. Need to call you John Holmes, Inspector Holmes.
Well, there is another John Holmes. We won't go there. So be careful about that.
I know nothing.
I don't know. We share some things in common. But anyway, but that really, bothered me when no one seemed to jump on that. I listened to pundits and everything else, and I was talking about it. My son said, that's remarkable, Dad, that you saw that. But there was another picture, a broader one, that I saw later that the Times took that from, and it actually shows the 12-year-old son there with them, and he's perfectly healthy. So there's just no way. But it disturbs me that people couldn't come to that conclusion pretty much immediately, and that is what really bothers me about AI and all this kind of fake stuff is losing the ability to critically think, and that's why you need to watch shows like this, quite frankly.
Well, yeah, and before you go on, I mean, that's the important thing is how do you know what's true anymore? You don't. And then look again, who put that picture out? It was Hamas. Look who put out the starving Israeli. It was Hamas. Who starved the Israeli? Hamas. You know, so they're telling you how bad this guy, the situation he is in, making him do a video of telling how bad it is, but it was Hamas who, number one, caused the attack. It was Hamas who starved this guy. It wasn't Bibi Netanyahu. And it was Hamas that has the ability to turn him loose. You know, and it's people need to keep that in mind, just like you brought up about that picture. Good point.
Well, the thing about it, you know, in this article that I was reading, it talks about Hamas putting that video out basically to put pressure on Netanyahu and Donald Trump. And if anything, they're digging their own grave because there's no way those two guys are going to cave. And I'll give you another example in the news. It just came out over the weekend that Donald Trump announced, and this is very intentional in my opinion, announced that we're putting a couple of nuke subs in an area where China and Russia are doing these joint exercises. And people may go, why is he doing that? We probably had subs there anyway. I maintain that Donald Trump made that announcement because Medvedev, you know, said last week that, oh, if you keep threatening or talking tough against Russia, we may have to start talking tough against you. And they thought he might back down. I think Donald Trump made that announcement on purpose myself.
Probably did. I mean, he's pretty good on that. I think he needs some work on foreign policy, but I think that was the right move. When you're dealing with Russia and China, and I hope we can have time to go into this more, because that really, outside of our debt, is our biggest threat, what's going on there. And it's interesting how Russia is playing nice with China, and China is kind of cozying up to Russia, and they don't like each other, but we're the common enemy between both of them. And so they'll do whatever they can to weaken our arsenal and our will.
Well, we're going to talk about that next, but before we do, I want to play one little video here, and this is a guy, Bill Maher, okay? So in this video, he talks about the choice that is confronting America, the Democrats, Republicans. He's talking about Madani before this comes on, but I really think that people need to listen to what Bill Maher is saying because he talks about Israel in this, and Bill Maher's not Jewish, but he talks about Israel in this, and I really think he makes a valid point that we need to forget about party lines and everything else. The Western world and Judeo-Christian values is kind of what he's talking about, but listen to what he says, and I think he's right, but we'll come back and talk about it.
To Israel as an outpost of Western civilization like it's a bad thing, please note, Western civilization is what gave the world pretty much every liberal precept that liberals are supposed to adore. Individual liberty, scientific inquiry, rule of law, religious freedom, women's rights, human rights, democracy, trial by jury, freedom of speech. Please, somebody stop us before we enlighten again. And since one can find all these concepts in today's Israel and virtually nowhere else in the Middle East, if anything, the world would be a better place if it had more Israels. Of course, this message falls on deaf ears to the current crop who reduce everything to being only victims or victimizers, so Israel is lumped in as the toxic fruit of the victimizing West. The irony being that all marginalized people live better today because of Western ideals, not in spite of them. For all the progressives and academics who
I mean, all I can really say there is amen. And what I really love that he says in there, he brings out the point that all the most liberal, quote, progressive things they talk about, and especially nowadays and claim to love, would be impossible under any other thing but basically Western thought. Any other place, not only would it not be allowed, you'd be literally put to death, and you are put to death. What are your thoughts on what Bill Maher said right there? I mean, it's hard to argue with it.
Bill Maher is not somebody I liked. I mean, I just didn't like his satire. I didn't like his political stance, but he has gone through an amazing transformation politically and the way he stands on stuff, his outlook on things. And I've gotten a lot of respect for him. Plus, in the beginning, he attacked me. Yoho ho and a bottle of rum. And anyways, I won't go into that. But what he says on this is exactly right. And if you remember me talking about that book written by Chris Stewart, The Miracle of Freedom, the 7 Tipping Points That Saved the World, it's exactly what he was saying. It is the Western ideology. And you know who really got burned on this was Steve King, the congressman from Iowa, that Kevin McCarthy just despised and worked to get him unelected. But Steve would talk about the Western ideologies, the Judeo-Christian principles have led to where the world is today. And if it wasn't for the ideologies, we'd be living in the dark ages. Things wouldn't have been invented like they have been today. And Bill Maher is absolutely right on this. It's the free state of liberal democracies that allows the intellect to create. And if you don't have systems of government that protect free thought, free speech, the ability, like our founding fathers put in the Constitution, the right to protect patent. I mean, that was in the Constitution because they understood the power of creating and what would come out of that as far as job creations, capitalism, which goes back to Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. That was written back in 16 or 1700s. I think it was 1600. And so where we are today, we're based on those principles that he talks about in here. And Israel is just an extension of that. And they've done very well. There's a great book written by, his last name is Simon Sinek. It's called The Rise of a Nation, and it's Israel. And it talks about all the great things that they've created.
Well said there. And one more little side note on that, and then I want to turn over some things for you to talk about here, Ted, specifically. But Bill Maher on his show this weekend did say that Madani in New York is a total disaster for the Democratic Party. He basically said if they elect him, it's going to kill the Democratic Party. So I thought that was interesting. But you mentioned on Friday, Ted, we got about 5 minutes left in the show, and I just want to kind of turn it over to you about what's happening between Russia and China. Of course, they're doing some war games right now, but you specifically talked about these using tariffs. Donald Trump wants to pit them against each other, and you warned that there's some pitfalls in there. Expand on that in the 5 minutes or so we got left.
There really are, and what you have to understand is, number one, China's role is to take over the world. Bar none. I mean, don't doubt that. I mean, there's so much written out there. But don't just believe what's written. Look at their actions. Their actions speak louder than the written word. They're building the 5 aircraft carriers. They've got a bigger arsenal than we have. They've got, I forget how big their army is, but it's in the millions of people that are conscripted. Look at the infiltration they've done all around the world. Look at what they've done in this country. But they're doing that in New Zealand, Australia, and any country around the world. They have their Han Chinese, which they view as the superior race on the planet. And historically, Russia and China were at war. I mean, they have fought several wars in between, and China's always lost. They came together in North Korea. They both worked against freedom and liberty and democracy, liberal democracy, and on the Korean Peninsula. And during World War II, Russia worked against Hitler, but he was communist. And then during the 80s, Nixon with Kissinger went over to China, and they worked to getting China to fend off Russia because Russia had the nuclear weapon and we were in the Cold War. And so we used China kind of as a pawn to break the back of Russia, and that's how we got Détente. We got tearing down the wall and the collapse of Russia. It's a different story today. China is the second largest economy in the world. Their goal is to take over the world, and they're playing us against Russia, and they're playing Russia against us. in the hopes that we both build, tear down our military defense system. And what they're doing is they're not expending any military power. What they're doing is propping up Russia and working to suppress us as far as our military capabilities. And their goal is to take over Taiwan, and that's going to lead to World War III. And Trump needs to be very careful in this, and he's tried to negotiate hard with China, but China has a couple cards, wild cards. One of them is the rare earth minerals, that they control 70 to 80% of the mineral, but they control over 90% of the refinement of those minerals. So that puts us, that's like an Achilles heel for us. It cripples us because we're dependent on that in so many industries. The other thing is they control the pharmaceuticals. They control vitamins and minerals that go into, our livestock feed and our vitamins and minerals, and they're not to be trusted on that. And so what we have to do as we move forward is Trump should not give in to China and try to play nice, because their ultimate goal is to take over the world. And what we need to do, and this is something that, Trump in his first election, in his first term, we passed the bill. It was an executive order, but we signed on to support it, was a critical mineral stockpile reserve for the United States. We used to have our own stockpile of that, but through the last 4 or 5 decades, we've ceded that. A lot of that was due to environmental regulations that drove those industries out of here. China was happy to pick it up. They don't have the standards we do. They do a lot of pollution on that. And then they suppress the price of those minerals, where you and I or another country or company can't afford to go into that. And we need to change that dynamic and need to start processing here. That's one major thing I think we need to do. And they're already starting it. There's 2 mines that are starting up on rare earth minerals here. We've got plenty of rare earth. I think there's 17 rare earth minerals that are critical to our national defense, electronics, and just our way of life. And it's a wake-up call that I'm glad to see the United States is finally answering.
Yeah, well, now you can see, ladies and gentlemen, while Ted is the captain of our ship, and I'm the guy down there that is telling us all to row in the same direction. And I say,
that's right, man.
Row well and live. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the show as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to you. Please go like what we're doing, share it far and wide. Give your grandkids or kids a homework assignment, have them watch our show, because you'll get the unvarnished truth here, where you scrub away all that old stuff and get down to the hardwood. That's what we do here on the 3 Ps, the Political Pirate Podcast. Ted, enjoy yourself in the Keys, and I'll see you again on Friday, sir.
Yes, sir. You guys take care. It's been an honor. Appreciate everybody watching. Like your comments, and send your sponsors our way, and you can be on this logo here or on this bottle. Y'all take care.